I've probably watched this clip 15 or 20 times at this point, which is embarrassing to admit because the first time I saw it, I was completely sure that it was fake. Some rich British guy in a boat, African jungle, wild gorilla. I remember thinking, okay, someone's going to get hurt, and this is going to end up on a very different kind of level. But there's this one moment, maybe 3 or 4 seconds of footage, where the gorilla does something with his hands that I still can't fully explain, and I've been trying to for a while now. But before we get to what that alpha male did that day that left the researchers dead silent, do me a quick favor. Hit subscribe if you want these raw stories told without the usual polish, and drop a comment right now with your location and the exact time on your clock. I always like to see how far these pieces of history travel. Anyway, the gorilla's name was Quibi. Aspinali had raised him from an infant on a private estate in England back in the late 90s. He fed him, slept near him, the whole thing. But then 2001 happened. The gorilla was getting too large, too heavy, so they did the right thing and shipped him to Africa to release him into the wild rainforest. 5 years later, in 2006, Aspinali decided to go back and look for him. The local trackers told him straight out that this was a terrible idea. 5 years in the jungle is an eternity for a primate. Quibi had claimed a piece of territory, he had a harem of females to protect, and he had become notoriously aggressive towards outsiders. He wasn't the juvenile from England anymore. Aspinali stood on the edge of a muddy river bank in the jungle and started making a low, throaty, gurgling noise, the specific peace call he used back in London when Quibi was small. He did that for days. Nothing, just the sound of flies and that heavy jungle heat that makes it hard to breathe. Aspinali was sitting there thinking he'd wasted his time and money, convinced Quibi was either dead or simply didn't care about his past life. But then something happened. The brush moved. This massive silverback stepped out onto the mud, and right behind him, his females filled the shadows. The camera crew wanted to run. They got scared. Instead, Quibi just stood there. He looked at the man, walked slowly into the shallow water by the boat, and stopped. Now, a silverback like that can snap your bones without even trying. And if he catches a strange scent near his group, his winnings tell him to eliminate the threat. There's no negotiating with that. For a long moment, nothing happened. Aspinali didn't move. The trackers on the bank had gone completely rigid. One of them later said he had stopped breathing entirely without realizing it. The only sound was the river sliding past and the distant noise of something moving high up in the canopy. Quibi tilted his head, just slightly, the way a dog does when it hears a sound it almost recognizes. Then Spinali did the only thing he could think to do. He made the sound, the same low, throaty, gurgly he used to make back in London, when Quibi was small and frightened and needed to know that the world was safe. It came out quieter than he intended. Almost embarrassing, standing there in the middle of the African jungle, making that noise at a 400-pound wild animal who could end the conversation in about 2 seconds. Quibi went completely still. Then Aspinali heard it back. A low, deep rumble rising from somewhere inside the gorilla's chest. Not a warning, not the beginning of a charge. It was the exact sound Quibi used to make as a baby when he was content and warm and didn't need anything from the world. When Aspinali later called his love gurgle, he said, "I heard that sound and I knew everything was going to be okay." Nobody on that riverbank moved. One of the researchers said later that she could think that she might be watching the last seconds of a man's life. But she kept the camera rolling because she didn't know what else to do with her hands. Quibi leaned forward slowly, the way you would move around something fragile, and pressed his nose directly against Aspinalli's face. Just smelled him. 3 seconds of complete stillness. Then he pulled back and looked at him. Really looked. Like he was trying to solve something. Who was this man? Did he recognize him? The camera crew didn't move. Nobody said a word. The jungle just kept going around them like nothing had happened. Then the gorilla took Aspinalli by the wrists and pulled him in, wrapping those enormous arms around him. No force, just weight. The kind of embrace that makes it hard to breathe for a completely different reason. He started gently parting Aspinalli's hair with his fingers, grooming him the way gorillas do with the ones they trust completely. He checked his ears. He took the man's hands and pulled them back to his nose just to smell them again. Things he only did as a baby with this one specific human 5 years ago and an ocean ago. Then Quibi picked up some leaves from the ground, started chewing them, and pushed them gently toward Aspinalli's mouth. Aspinalli chewed. They sat there passing leaves back and forth, sharing them the way gorillas do with family. The scientists on the bank had never written anything like this before in a field log. At some point, Quibi turned towards the tree line and made a low, deliberate sound. His females came out slowly and settled in the grass nearby. He was presenting the man to his troop, saying, "This one is safe. This one is mine. I trust this man." They sat in the mud for hours. Every time Aspinalli tried to take a step back towards the boat, the gorilla would slide that giant arm around his waist and pull him right back down, gently. Like he just wasn't ready for the man to go yet. But the hardest part of writing the log for the scientists happened when the sun went down and Aspinalli had to get back on the boat. As the engine cranked, Quibi didn't fade back into the trees with his troop. He walked right out into the river with the water up to his belly, following the boat along the bank. He stood there in the current, completely still, watching that little piece of wood grow smaller until it went around the bend and the boat was no longer visible for the gorilla. The researchers who stayed behind wrote that the gorilla didn't go back to his nesting site that night. He laid down right there on the cold mud of the river bank, alone, in the exact spot where they had said goodbye. And for hours after the boat disappeared, he kept calling out in the dark water. The researchers described him as confused, as if he genuinely couldn't understand why the man had left and wasn't coming back. I have watched that raw footage a lot, and that deep, heavy purring sound that the gorilla made into a man's shoulder, it still gets to me. We like to think we are the only ones on this planet capable of carrying feelings like that, of holding on to a connection through years of total silence. Kiwi proved that wrong, and he did it without saying a single word. If Kiwi would have followed his thousands of years of evolutionary programming and treated that man as an intruder, no biologist on Earth could have blamed him. That area belonged to him. Do you believe a wild animal is capable of feeling the genuine pain of a broken heart when a loved one leaves them behind? Yes or no? Let us know your comments